Hey everyone, this is George Couros with a year-end epic book review. All right, this is not really an epic book review. I just like the music, and so I wanted to revisit some of the books I read that really had an impact on me this year. They weren't necessarily written this year, but I read them this year, and I think they will resonate for years to come and really kind of connect with me. So I wanted to do a few of these to end the year, just kind of like a year in review. And the book that I've chosen to review today is the book called Hidden Potential: The Science of Achieving Greater Things by Adam Grant. Now, this book was suggested to me several times by my good friend Katie Martin, but for whatever reason, I just didn't want to read it. There's just other stuff. I don't read books because they're popular or because they're really big right now. I feel that I read books when I need them. So I remember years ago reading the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and it's one of my favorite books of all time. It was written, I think, in the 1930s, and I just needed to read that. And I'm not that old, but I'm close. This is something I just read at that moment. So I just kind of felt at that moment, I wanted to read it, and I was really appreciative of this book. And I think for educators specifically, this book is really, if you talk about this idea of hidden potential, the science of achieving greater things, this could all also be titled like How to Be an Amazing Learner, because it really is about your own growth, your own development. And it's not really a self-help book as much as it is a book about how to really develop yourself as a learner and why that actually is so important. Because I feel like self-help books are really focused on motivation. You can do it. So this gives you strategies. This really kind of focuses on kind of how to grow and why learning is so important to me. So I think that's why it really resonated with me. And full disclosure, as I'm reading it, a lot of things that Adam Grant is saying are very similar to what I shared in Innovator's Mindset, but not necessarily for education. I think that's one of the differences. Now, I'm not saying I'm Adam Grant by any means. He's a brilliant, brilliant mind. But it is really, there's a lot of stuff that he talks about. Like one of the things that really connects with me is he talks about when you actually share your learning with others and you teach others, there is a really, you really go in depth with your learning. And one of the videos I've shared in my presentation, I've talked about it, is a video of my niece actually doing a makeup tutorial when she was 4 years old. And I talked about that when she enters school, she really believes not only can she learn, but she can actually teach. And there is a quote that I share alongside of this. It's from Joseph Joubert. He says, "To teach is to learn twice." Like, what is your depth of understanding a concept when you teach the entire world? And so Grant talks about this ability to teach others to really, focus on your own depth of learning. And so really in schools, how do we actually open up doors for our kids that they are sharing their expertise with the world? Not only we're bringing in experts into our classrooms. So what I want to do today is share 3 quotes, just read them to you. And so I'm kind of off. I wrote a few points that really, I like to kind of do this impromptu, see what comes to my mind. I wrote a couple points, but typically I never really stick to them. So I want to share 3 quotes with you, kind of keep this quick, hopefully give you some, some ideas, some thinking, maybe challenge you a little bit. And so the first one that I picked from this book is this one from Adam Grant. "The way you like to learn is what makes you comfortable, but it isn't necessarily how you learn best. Sometimes you even learn better in the mode that makes you the most uncomfortable, because you have to work harder at it. This is the first form of courage, being brave enough to embrace discomfort and throw your learning style out the window." And the last part about learning style, I don't know, I don't know if that's the phrasing that I would use, but I was thinking about this, not on an educational level, but a personal level and fitness. Here's something that I've really learned about myself. The exercises that I hate doing the most are typically the ones I should be doing. There's a reason I hate them, because I feel like I'm lacking strength in that area. And I'll give you an example. Pull-ups. Pull-ups for me were terrifying, especially when I was heavier. They're really hard to do. I have this is embarrassing. I have an incident that happened to me as a kid. We used to do this Canadian fitness testing. And if you're from Canada and you're anywhere near my age, you know what I'm talking about. And there's things that we used to do in it. For example, we used to do a 12-minute run. And I hated that so much, which is amazing because I've run, a few marathons now. But that 12 minutes, I dreaded that forever. That was one. We did a flexibility test. I sucked at that. Everything the Canadian fitness test when I was a kid, I was terrible at. And I was a pretty big kid. I was pretty heavy at the time. And we actually had to do this thing called the flexed arm hang. And when we did the flexed arm hang, it actually, you would just basically hold yourself and you'd kind of keep eye level with the bar and you'd hold yourself as long as you could and they would time you, right? And typically I could do 2 seconds. Didn't really have much upper body strength. I was a really heavy kid. Combine those two, you're going to have some issues. So one year I actually did it and it was like, these are little kids. We're all little kids and they have this like bar in a doorway. And that's kind of how they did the testing. It wasn't like they had an elaborate, this is a small town in Canada. It's not like elaborate gym structure set up for, doing pull-ups. So it's just in a door. So I remember one year I did it and I actually, and I'm not kidding with the 2 seconds, literally is like, they pulled the chair over my feet. I'd hold it as hard as I could. And then basically I'd let go. So this one year I basically felt I could get better at it. And I held on for a little bit and basically I made probably like 5 or 6 seconds and the bar literally came off the door and it was embarrassing and it stuck with me forever that, like I was so heavy that I actually pulled the bar off the door that every other kid was able to hang off of. And that's something that's always kind of bugged me. So when I do arm hangs or pull-ups, it wasn't just a physical, block in my mind or physical block. It was also a mental block that really kind of stuck with me. So this thing is that really when you're looking at stuff that you don't want to do and stuff that you maybe struggle with, that actually is where some of the most growth can happen. And now, interestingly enough, when I went through my weight loss really in the last 4 or 5 years, one of the things was I really want to do pull-ups. I wanted to kind of get over that. And now I could barely do one. And without, some support, now I do, probably a couple hundred a day. It's something that I want to do and really and it's weird because even though I know I can do it, every single time I'm like, I'm just terrified I'm not going to be able to pull up. And that's mental structure. Sometimes facing your fear, sometimes facing the thing that you don't want to do is also the thing that you should, go to first, because that is where you need to grow. If you are so comfortable doing something over and over again, you typically won't get those breakthroughs. Chris Kennedy, who I've mentioned on this podcast, brilliant mind in education, superintendent. I also talked to him, on a personal level with running. And I said, I cannot break this certain barrier for time in my kilometer, right? I still use kilometers. I just can't do miles. And he said, what you need to do, what I challenge you to do is do some sprinting. And that's not something I actually had done. And, it's really daunting. That actually really, really pushed me. There's good friends of mine who I know hated writing, who I pushed to write, and now they've written best-selling books. The thing that you are avoiding is typically the thing that will actually give you, the most, the biggest results. So just something I think about too. All right. Second quote. It's easy for people to be critics or cheerleaders. It's harder to get them to be coaches. A critic sees your weaknesses and attacks your worst self. A cheerleader sees your strengths and celebrates your best self. A coach sees your potential and helps you become a better version of yourself. I really like this distinction between the idea that a critic isn't really helpful, but neither is a cheerleader. And this is something you see on social media is like, ignore the haters. I also think you got to kind of ignore the people that are, giving you accolades. And, you always want to be grateful, people appreciating you. But that can actually kind of warp your mind in a certain sense that you think if you're ignoring the haters but only listen to people who say you're awesome, that's going to mess you up. That's not going to be beneficial. And as much as I love to hear compliments, you can compliment the down below. I'm a little kidding. Everyone likes hearing compliments, appreciation for the work that they do. It is something that matters to me. But if you ignore the haters, are you paying attention to only the people that just throw accolades your way without really, celebrating you? So when I think of a coach, there's something, and I this is why I really talk about relationships being crucial to innovation education. How are people going to be innovative in the work that they do if they aren't sure that you got their back? If you're going to push them, do you support them? Do you understand that too? Because we always talk about taking risks, trying new things, but it's easy for someone in a position of authority to tell someone who's a subordinate to take a risk, because, you know, if they screw up, they could lose their job. That's kind of how they're actually thinking through that process. So a little thing, and this is going to make me look bad, but typically when I present, a lot of people will actually say like, hey, we got feedback. And I'm like, I don't want to read it. And it's not that I'm not looking for feedback, but here's what I know about myself. There's probably going to be a majority of things that are said are nice. Not necessarily because I'm doing such a great job, but a lot of people don't. If they think something mean, they don't want to write it, you know, and I understand that. But there's some person that, you know, is just like, has to like tell you how it is, right? And have that moment. And so you could have like 100 comments on a sheet, and then you see that one that really hits you and really just goes at you, and then you ignore the 99. That's not good. So I don't want to pay attention to that too, right? Now, the other focus is like, let's say there's 100% and you pay attention to that. Well, that's not helping you either. So instead of actually paying attention to some of those feedback, and it's not like saying don't read it ever, but it's just, you have to be, I know myself and I know what I'll get caught up in and why it's not beneficial to me. So what I try to do to really kind of improve my craft is really go to people I know who are, you know, doing some of this work, or, you know, people that are in the district that maybe I look up to, or people are, you know, speakers at events, and really kind of say like, hey, what would you do different? Like, what stuck out to you? You know, what kind of challenged you? And I think that kind of that notion is that there has to be some relationship there. I don't want to hear your pushback to me if I don't ever hear your support. I have no interest in it, because you're not, to me, that would make you a terrible teacher. If you only crap on kids when they do something wrong, but you don't actually ever compliment them or talk about what the great stuff they're doing, that's not a good teacher. But then you see that happen online all the time, and it's really, really quite embarrassing, you know, when people do that. And I really am cognizant of that. I don't like to judge people and say like, oh, you do that, I've never done it. There was a point where the only time I would comment on blogs was only to disagree. That was the only time. So I'd read your blog 100 times, but then one I didn't like, boom, that's when you're getting the comment. And is that really a good practice? And I stopped doing that too. And I think sometimes I just want to say like, hey, this is great. And like, maybe, hey, pop in. And typically if I like, hey, I really challenge something, if I have some relationship that I can privately message them and have a conversation with it, I think that's much more powerful than, you know, that public thing, because, you know, you don't know how someone's feeling on the other side, or maybe even have a conversation. So if you're saying ignore the haters, then we got to ignore the lovers too, right? And I don't know, is that the best way to say that? But you know what I mean. So when you're looking, critics or cheerleaders, don't pay attention. Look for coaches, people you know got your back, will also challenge you. That's where you're going to get the best bang for your buck. All right, this one. This is the last quote I'm going to share. Character is more than just having principles. It is a learned capacity to live by your principles. I love this quote. I don't talk politics here. And I think I don't talk politics, but I really do focus on principles. I really struggle with politics and seeing how basically society like focuses more on being on a team than on living by principles, right? So there is an analogy. I can't remember who said it, but I thought it was really interesting. When you look at politics, they were talking about college sports, and what they had said was that basically when it's my team, or when it's the team I hate cheating, then it's wrong. But when it's my team, I kind of look the other way. It's the same thing with politics. We shouldn't do that, right? I look to people at, do they live by what they're saying? Do they live by what they're expecting of the people that they serve? Principles really, really matters to me. And that should be, you know, I think actually if you support a political party, the ones you should be calling out the most aren't the ones on the other side. It should be the ones on your own team saying like, hey, if you want us to do this, you got to live by that too, right? And I think that's part of it too. And that's how people grow. That's how you get better. If I can continuously do wrong and then no matter what, you'll vote for me, then I'm just going to keep doing wrong. And I think that's something that really, really matters to me. And so when you look at, for me, when you look at somebody, don't look at what they say, but look at what they do. That really, really matters to me. And I think this is really important to me. And you kind of noticed in the last example, I kind of caught myself because I don't want to like judge other people knowing that I made the same mistakes. This is not about holding people to a standard of perfection. We are all going to make mistakes, including myself. We are all going to screw up. And I think really when I kind of get in a space where I start looking at someone else and saying like, this is something you do, I actually pull back and I'm like, I've probably done it too, right? And I've probably done it too. So let's, when I maybe criticize someone on my blog, the first person I always criticize is myself. Like, hey, if I see something that bothers me, I try to look back, go through my experiences. Did I do the exact same thing? And so this is not about perfection, and it's not about 100% hit rate on your principles. We all falter. We all, make mistakes. So here's an example of this. There's a lot of, Anxious Generation, I mentioned it several times, Jonathan Haidt's book. A lot of people really kind of criticizing what kids are doing. I'm like, adults are terrible. If you look at adults on social media, they're horrible. And then I say, like, I encourage you to have like a political conversation on Facebook, see how it goes. You'll see how bad the adults are. And, we talk about kids doing these horrible things. And one of the things I've shared in my talks is, if your worst 10 minutes were online, who in this room would have a job? And what's really interesting is many people, they're not thinking about their worst 10 minutes. They're actually sorting between which 10 minutes is actually worse. And that would include myself. None of us is perfect. All of us would be in trouble if, we saw any of the private conversations, some of the stuff too. And, I'm sure there's like one or two people listening to this like, okay, good, congratulations. But I'm going to tell you, I couldn't live up to that standard. And so I think when it's not necessarily judging our kids, but having an empathetic lens when we look at them, that we all made mistakes. They live in a totally different time, and they're actually measured harder than others. And so when I read this about principles, that really, really matters. Don't look at, like I said, don't listen to what someone's saying. Look at what they're doing. That to me really, really matters. And I was thinking about this too, that principles, when they matter most is when they're hardest to do. And so I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a routine and you are trying to live up to that routine. When you struggle, right? When we have habits, when we say like, oh, live by your habits. Habits matter most when they're hard to do. So if you consistently commit to going to the gym, going for a run, and those days you don't feel like doing it, that's the day you probably need to go. And it kind of goes back to, the earlier quote about like kind of like when that thing that gives you discomfort, that's the thing you need to do. Once you actually start to learn to do your habits when things are when they are the hardest to do, that's when they actually have the biggest impact. So I just wanted to share those quotes with you. Some are thinking I've wanted to kind of keep these short, just, off the cuff stuff. But if you read this book, I'd love to hear what you think about it. Any quotes that stuck out to you, please feel free to comment down below. But thanks for being here. I hope that this has given you some value, maybe just kind of a chill podcast. And yeah, I've been trying to like just kind of deeply reflect. This has been quite a year for me. It's been a struggle, and I just want to kind of have some thinking, some sharing, and just some one-on-one time with you all listening here too. So I will tell you, the reason I bring up this book, I highly recommend it. You can see it in the links down below. If you haven't read it, I really encourage it, especially if you're in education. I think there's a lot of parallels to what we do for teaching and learning in the classroom. But thanks again for being here for another epic book review. All right, have a wonderful day. Take care.